Hey guys, back with another video. I haven't done a wrap up in quite some time. So this video will be a wrap up reading update video. I haven't done one in a long time. I haven't done a TBR in a long time. Those of you that are teachers and you guys do booktube full time, I don't know how you manage. I am learning. I'm getting there, or I will get there, but I am learning. So I actually did not go back through my videos to see the last TBR or wrap up that I did. So I'm gonna start. I got a feeling that the last one I did was February, but I'm gonna go ahead and just start with February as my wrap up, and I'm going to give you all of the books that I have read from February to now. I personally don't think that it's a whole lot of books. I think this might average out somewhere between maybe 3 and 4 books a month, maybe less than that. I didn't really do all the math to go with it. But we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to do the wrap up. Some of these books I've read for my students to kind of pre-read it for them before they read it. Some of them I did the same thing for my children, pre-read books before they were able to read them. And then some of them are reads of my own. But since I read them all, I rated them all in my Goodreads, and what I will do is tell you what my rating is. And if the book is memorable, I will tell you what I remember about it, if I recommend, and I will also let you know what books I read for my students if I remember. So let's just give this a shot. I did not write anything out before filming this. Sometimes I write things out so I know like notes to like what I'm gonna say. I didn't this time. I didn't at all this time. Also, I apologize for any background noise. My little 6-year-old is having technology issues with his tablet and the Nintendo Switch, and calling his best friend on Kids Messenger so they can like talk to each other while they play. It's the cutest thing, but it's also the most aggravating thing, because when the technology doesn't work, or when one of them loses in the game, they're both extremely sore losers. But what can you do? And then I have a 11-year-old, now an 11-year-old, as of July 1st, who just wants to argue back with him. So I don't even know if you can hear any of that. So yeah, sorry for all of that. I literally talked to them right before I started. But if you have children, then you know. If you deal with children, then you know. All right, so first book is called Agricultural Inventions at the Top of the Field by Helen Mason. I gave this a 4-star read. This was for my students for science, and the cover looks like that. This was for science. We had to make paper farms when we were learning about agriculture and resources and food and all that jazz, and you know, how to have a better environment. I do recommend that one. That one was pretty good, pretty simplistic for 5th graders, and there were pieces in the book that challenge those that are of higher thinking to go and do further research. So it's very intriguing for all parties, no matter what level they were at in their comprehension. Next, I started but DNF'd Anxious People. I didn't really care for Anxious People. I really tried. I genuinely tried. I tried to read the book 3 times, and it just wasn't happening for me. Apparently this is also a TV series on Netflix or movie or something like that. And I couldn't get with the program. I figured when I started to read it, the third time, that if I didn't get through it, then I will just look it up later on Overdrive and give it another go then. But I DNF'd it. I did not care for it. I gave it a 2-star rating. It just was not grabbing my attention. So, and that's literally what I wrote in my review. It wasn't grabbing my attention. Maybe I'll go back at a later time and give it another go. Just wasn't doing it for me. Next book was Ghost Boys. I read this for both my students and my oldest son, to see if there was anything within the book that I knew parents wouldn't approve of their students reading in my classroom. And my son wants me to talk about books with him when he reads it, to kind of help him go deeper into his thinking. And that is what the cover looks like, Ghost Boys. I had 3 students read the book, and my son, and I read it, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it a 5-star. And I'm gonna go ahead and read my review, and it's a short review. It says, "This was a great read. I especially love how this wasn't a story of revenge or hate, but a story of a struggle and a story of forgiveness and learning. This book was recommended to me by one of my students from last year. So I'm actually glad that I read it, and I highly recommend it. And the reason why I said this was not a story of revenge or hate is because if you don't know the setting of the book, a younger black boy, hi Joshua, hi, a younger black boy was shot and killed by a white police officer. But instead of this story centering around like hate, let's get him back, this wouldn't have happened if he was white, and those things are not inaccurate, but instead of it just centering around that, like most of what you hear on the news nowadays it was centered around forgiveness, of him getting the police officer to admit that he was scared, that it was stereotyped, not holding what the police officer did against the police officer's family. And that part to me was the most important part in all of that. Not that anything else that wasn't important, but holding a group of people accountable for something someone else did over here. So I have a problem with that. Some of the time, not all the time, but some of the time I have a problem with it. Especially in situations like this, mainly because one, the children and the wife wasn't there when that police officer decided to make that choice. It's the same thing that we teach our students and our children when they get old enough and they know right and wrong. Your parent wasn't there when you decided to make that choice. So why are we holding the parent accountable for something that the child did? The child knows that the parent is like, you're not supposed to do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. We taught you better than that. We've raised you better than that. Now I do know, and I'm not naive to the fact that not every parent raises their child the healthiest of ways, but generally our children know right from wrong. We teach them that in our house. So if they go out into the world and they decide to make wrong choices, that is not always on the parent. Sometimes, yes, it is, because children do repeat. But to an extent, the child, just like an adult, still has to sit there and contemplate what's right and wrong. So why wouldn't that just the police officer be held accountable for his choices, and why would we hold that against the family? So it was a great story about how this ghost boy and spoiler alert, and this other ghost boy who is Emmett Till is the guide for this young boy in this book to get him through things. They are not holding the grudge against the child in this situation. And they're not really holding the grudge against the police officer, but they do want him to be accountable for his actions, which of course, yes. But I don't know, it was just a really, really nice story of how to get someone to take ownership of their own actions, but not holding that grudge against them, and being able to move on. Because I don't know, I feel like our grudges are what keeps us held on to the bad things. Not to say we're supposed to forgive people necessarily for them for their actions. I think that we should forgive people for ourselves so that we don't hold on to that hurt and let that hurt guide us. And I'm not saying don't be hurt by things and don't feel that way, because you're valid in your feelings. I am just saying that if we hold on to that for so long, it will keep us down and not allowing us to be free to move forward. But I got all of that from this book. So did my students. We had really good conversations about it. I did not bring my religion into it, but that is part of why I think that forgiveness is for us and not necessarily for the person who committed the act against us. Sometimes it is also for them, if they choose to take that forgiveness and know that they're forgiven and move on past, not necessarily past things, but through things. But again, that is me. I did not bring up my religion in class. I usually only talk about religion in class if my students bring it up and if they ask a question about me, not necessarily my beliefs in politics or anything like that. And usually my religion only come up when they ask me, like, what are you doing after school today? Well, I'm going to a Bible study, that sort of thing. So no, I'm not indoctrinating students, or however it is put in the media now. Next book, The Perfect Ruin. I believe this was a pick by I think their YouTube name is Books and Bow Ties. I haven't been onto YouTube in a minute, so I actually can't even remember what their name is. But it was Team Horror. I do remember that. And The Perfect Ruin was in the Black History Month thing. That's what I'm going for here. In the Black History Month read along, the genre that I read was horror, and The Perfect Storm, or The Perfect Ruin, was in that, and that's how that cover looks. I thought it was a great read. It wasn't an excellent read, like something I would go back and read again, but it was okay. I gave it a 3-star. It was, to me, just a very run-of-the-mill, true crime book. And I love true crime, don't get me wrong, but this one just didn't jump out to me in the way that I expected it to. I did have expectations for this book going in because it was very highly recommended. But my review is, this book reminds me of the BET movie Obsessed and movies like that. It wasn't a bad read at all, but it wasn't necessarily my go-to. The reason why it wasn't my go-to is because the movies like Obsessed, they're okay movies, they're good movies. I watch them all the time. I don't repeat watch them. So like the movie Obsessed, I think Beyonce was in that one, or she was in one that was kind of like it. It was a good movie. And then I saw another movie like before the one that Beyonce was in that came out before that. And then there was like 2 other movies that came out afterwards, and they're all the same thing. And it's not like it's the same thing with its own twists. They're all the exact same thing. And that's how I felt about this one. I actually do want to go back and read this book because I feel like I wouldn't have the same idea about it being exactly like Obsessed because it was different. But in my mind, that's all I could think about the entire time that I was reading it. So maybe I'll pick that back up later. Also for February, I read along with my small group of women at church, Kingdom Women, Embracing Your Purpose, Power, and Possibilities by Tony Evans and Crystal Evans Hurst, which is Tony Evans's daughter. I gave it a 4-star rating. And this is how the book looks. He has a series. It's like Kingdom Children, Kingdom Teens, and Kingdom Men as well. I gave it a 4-star. Sorry, I gave it a 4-star and not a 5-star only simply because the book is titled Kingdom Women. I would have liked to have heard from Crystal more than Tony Evans. I also listened to the audiobook when I wasn't able to sit down and read, because my schedule around that time was just super packed, and I can't put my finger on as to why, but we had a lot going on. So there were maybe 5 or 10 minutes where I could sit down and read, but I was in a car a lot driving, so I definitely listened to quite a bit of it in the car as well. So my review, I wish Crystal did more of the speaking. I know she had a hand to hand in the writing because they did an interview with them, and a lot of what she had to say was in the writing. So it wasn't like one person did more of the writing than the other, but at the same time, I feel like Tony kind of did more of the writing, but that's me. This book is about women empowerment through Christ and Christ's eyes. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. We found a spider. All right. So, Kingdom Women. The book is about empowering women through the eyes of Christ and how important women are to the kingdom and just to the world. But I just really would have wanted to hear more from Crystal. But like I said, what she had to say was really good. What Tony had to say was also really good. And it did actually give a lot to the story. So it wasn't like it didn't. It gave a lot to the story because you were able to see just how kingdom men view their kingdom women and just how important and equal they are to them. Even though there are lots of people who hone in on First Corinthians with Paul and his structure in there, or scripture in there, when he was talking about women should only be, seen, not heard, all that stuff. But if you do the full story on First Corinthians, you can see why at the moment that he did say that. I'm not justifying anyone's views on women being beneath men and their belief on what Christianity is, but in my study, what I gathered from that, when I did the study on my own, was literally the time period and how the women during that time and in the Corinth area place, that the women were being deceitful. And at the time, they shouldn't be being deceitful. They should be trying to uplift their community, men and women, and it wasn't happening that way. But I think through Tony's eyes, he did a really good job on showing how equal the women are in God's kingdom to the men. And I'm going to turn on this light back here because I feel like there is not much light right here. Because if I turn my ring light up any higher, it's going to drown out my face because of my glasses. So actually, let me pause for 1 more second. All right, next book I read was Big Cats. And we did a unit on the big cats in the jungle. It was in my science unit, and some of the students overlapped it with history and where, with spirit animals. So that was kind of cool. A next one that I read I think I was supposed to read this one in February, but I read it in March. Big Cats, I also read in March. Is Hide and Seeker. Anybody who loves horror, whether elementary, middle grade, or high school, young adult, whatever you want to call it, grown up, you should definitely be reading this. You should definitely read this. So this book, I had 3 of my students read this book. Well, I didn't have them. They read three of my students read this book on their own. I did tell them that it was scary, but mostly only my students who read Goosebumps and books like that read this book. And no, my son did not read this. But let me tell you, this is like not Goosebumps. This is a step up from Goosebumps. This is actually legitimately scary. It legitimately scares some of my fifth graders. So this book, so this is what I wrote. I know this book is supposed to be for intermediate elementary school age students and middle school students, but this book had me not wanting to play another game of hide and seek. There's no doubt that the kids can get nightmares from this book, but I personally loved every bit of this book. It was very well written, and it made you actually feel like you were with them in this game of hide and seek. So I said it was a great read, and I highly recommended it. It legitimately made me feel like I was a kid again playing hide and seek. And no, but this was like, oh, you're a kid again, you're playing hide and seek, and now it's like actually scary and not like fun. Brought a whole new, if your kids do not understand paranormal or the concept of paranormal or ghosts, do not have them read this. It will actually, for real, I personally think it will mess them up. They will have nightmares for a very long time, because this is to me, this is a psychological thriller for kids, and it would literally have them having nightmares. Next book is The Devil in Silver, by Victor Laval, I believe is how you say his name. That is the cover. This was the first time I read a read from him where it wasn't like, but I did give it a 3-star rating. It was not bad, but it was not memorable to me. So I feel like I need to go back and read it. I'm going to read you what I wrote. And it says, this one was a harder read to get through. I loved the first 60% of this book, but then things started to get slow for me, which is why I didn't remember too much from it. When a book is too slow, I tend to not remember all the things from the book. But I have to go back and read like the last, because I read the first half of this book physically, and then I listened to the other half of it, so I have to go back and listen to the last half of it again. It wasn't, nothing about it stood out for me. I actually picked up the audiobook because I thought that maybe since I read at a slower pace than what I listen to things, that maybe it was me. I don't know, but I didn't get all the vibes. It said I did have a quote from this book, which it was at the end of the book. The quote went roughly like, you move the headstones, but not the bodies. But if I'm not mistaken, that is a quote from Poltergeist. So it's kind of like a nod to Poltergeist, for when they were talking about the activity in the house. And then I believe it was like when the ground started coming up and all these bodies came up from underneath it. But right before the bodies came up, I believe that there was a conversation about like, oh, this land is literally built on top of a cemetery. It wasn't that the bodies were dug up and relocated. It was literally, they built an entire, what do you call it? Housing complex. And it wasn't like apartment complex, but it was just like one of those like neighborhood housing places, on top of literal graves. So yeah, that I definitely remembered. So this definitely was not a bad read. It was slow for me this first time around, and I think it was in large part when I come home from work. I also was very exhausted being a first year teacher, so I think that also had something to do with it. So I do plan on going back and reading it again. It's oh yes, I definitely do recommend this book. to people. It takes you on a journey that I said I personally think is way more fun and chaotic than One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I really think you might like it. So the plot of this book does have something to do with being in a psych ward and all the craziness that goes on in the mind, and it sometimes has you thinking like, is it the mind of a sane person that you're following here, or is it a mind and they think that he's not sane, or is it literally a mind of a sane person and now you've probably thinking that you're insane for reading it. There were times that overlapped like that, but like I said, again, there were some parts of it that was just really slow, and I don't remember all aspects of it, but as I'm talking about it now, some things are popping up, but it wasn't one that as soon as I look at the cover I can tell you like everything I read, because it just didn't stand out that way. Next, boundaries, when to say yes, how to say yes, or how when to say yes, how to say no, to take control of your life, by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Um, this is the cover. I absolutely love this book. I actually want to go back and read this book to dissect it even more. I gave this book a 5-star rating. Um, and I'll just read you what I have. This video is getting longer than I thought it was going to be. This book wasn't anything that I didn't know already, but I do appreciate how it was written and how relatable it was to the average reader. I also appreciate the practical ways that the advice can be practiced, and I was not expecting it to be a Christian read, but I personally greatly appreciate it, as I am a Christian, and I do think that this is a great book, and I do highly recommend it. Because a lot of what we do as people, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, is that we people please, and we get lost in people pleasing and finding approval through the eyes of people. And I personally love how very practical the advice is in this book about finding yourself through the eyes of God, and to say yes at the best times and to say no when it's needed. Christian or not, I think this is a great read. I think that we don't need to walk around being yes people, saying yes to everything. I think saying no is not a bad thing, and saying no can be healthy for you. And I really like how they made this relatable to scripture as well. Next read is The Boy Who Harnessed the Moon. So The Devil in Silver was supposed to be a February read. I read it in March and finished it in April. Boundaries started in March, finished in April. The Boy Who Harnessed the Moon by William Kamkwamba, Brian Mealer, and Elizabeth Zunan. But I gave it a 5-star. I read this version of the book. This is the one that we give our students in 5th grade to do a quicker lesson on wind, harnessing the wind, for like wind power and solar panels and different ways of getting your resources from the earth instead of having to pay high electricity bills. And how this young man was the first one to do that in his village by doing research in his library so that his village can be more productive and not to where they were starving, because that's what it was. It got to the point to where him and his family and several other families around him were starving. They had to drop out of school because you had to pay for school there, but there was just so much he couldn't do because they had no resources. And by them being able to harness in the windmill there some electricity, they were able to get that through their town, and their town came alive again. But this was a really, really great read with my classroom. I did give it a 5-star rating. We even looked up interviews with this young man and TED Talks. It was great. So I wrote this was a very informative read. My students and I very much loved this. We all loved that the book gave insight on a place that they had never heard of, opening them up to the fact that um, other people in other parts of the world go through things similar to us. We read this book for science to support students in learning wind turbines and the engineering cycle. It was a great mentoring text. Um, this also gave my students another insight on dialects, different dialects and different ways of speaking. Because if we are not noticing our American Black children, even though they call themselves African American, have a big issue with listening to the way African people speak from Africa. Um, this was the first book that we read, and watching the TED Talks to where they heard that different dialect. And then we tried again with the Children of Blood and Bone series with Tony Ediemi, and we got like halfway through the first chapter, and the dialect was too strong for them, and they didn't want anything to do with it. I just think that says on our part as African American Black people ancestored from Africa that we need to do better with incorporating and teaching our Black students about where they come from and their roots. Because it wasn't that they were like, oh my goodness, this is hard to listen to. It's like they literally wanted nothing to do with it. And this was about as good as it got. And they did love this book, which was good, but I think we just need to do better. All right, and so now we're to May. We have Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Gran. And I gave this a 5-star rating. There was a lot that I learned in this book. This was just a book for me. I learned so much in this book. I always heard of Osage Beach, but I never heard of the Indian murders there. I honestly, I'm today's years old and I never heard of it. I learned a lot. It was very, it wasn't surprising to me the things that occurred because the history of European white people back then and coming here to settle, and the history of the Indians and how they were taken away, uprooted, and taken away to schools and forced into Americanized civilization. So that part wasn't like unheard of, and it wasn't surprising, but the other stuff that followed with the murders and taking charge of the properties and how they went about doing that, it was just heartbreaking. And if you don't know any of that about this book, sorry, it's a spoiler alert. But it was just really heartbreaking, and was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe that the extent that some people went to for greed. It was crazy. It was crazy, but great read, 5-star, highly recommend. Another book that I finished in May and reread again here. I did not rate it yet, but I will rate this a 5-star. And this book is called Thick and Other Essays. Sorry about that. My son walked through the door. My dogs are barking. The title of this book is called Thick and Other Essays by Tressie McMillan Cottom. I actually don't know how to pronounce her name, and I apologize for all the names I'm butchering in this video. So this book is a 5-star book. The reason why is that even though it's not on the list of memoirs, I do think that this is kind of like a memoir. The author is the writer. She's telling you her point of view on her beauty to the world, and how she came to that point, and the different things that Black women, and it's especially Black women, go through to get an understanding of what they feel is their beauty, their inner beauty or outer beauty. Some of it I agree with and some of it I do not, but I will still rate it a 5 star because it's her personal like take on it. And it was very, very powerful, very powerful. I actually will not give any part of this away. But there was a lot of things that was mentioned in this book that I had no idea about that happened for Black men in the media that I had to go back and look up. But one thing I will say is one of the most powerful things that she talked about was Black men's view of their Black women's beauty. And I say that to say everyone is entitled to their own opinion, etc. And there's a lot of interracial relationships like mine as well. But she's not even talking about like necessarily like from the view of a Black male that's wanting to get with a Black woman. It is like brothers and sisters, uncles, cousins, just being around them and being in conversation with them about things that are going on and what they consider Black beauty and what they consider, I won't say the word on here, but what do we call what they believe women are who sleep around or don't sleep around when they become of age, what they consider those women as far as their eyes and their desires see. I'm looking for a word, but I can't find it. But it was a really good read, and I do recommend this read. But I will say go in with trigger warnings because it's a lot. Like she mentions like I believe it's abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. There is talk of miscarriage. There is talk of poverty and racism and how people have to go about acting white to be able to speak to the white person, you know, from back then to be able to just live normal. There's a whole lot of that. So trigger warning for that. Next book was I read this I finished this at the end of May. But for some reason it did not update and it continues to not want to update. And the only reason why I know I finished it at the end of May is because I read this book with my students during the regular school year and summer school started in June. So we were done reading this before the last day of school. Actually, we were done reading this at the end of the second to last week of school because the last week of school we took our time watching the movie. But anyway, it's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Of course, I gave this a 5-star. I love the Harry Potter series for what it was when it originally came out. And that's what I will say about that. And my classroom is Harry Potter themed and my students absolutely love it. They love the idea of having their own house and winning points for the house cup. All that jazz. And the next 2 books that I read are books that were on my summer school reading list that was sent to me in an email of books that I have to teach to my students and use it, you know, as mentor text. I did not use either one of these books because it turned out they sent me the wrong curriculum. I was trying to read the curriculum before summer school started so that I could have, you know, what I needed to say when I needed to say written down in the on post-it notes in the margins. It didn't happen that way. The first book is my very favorite book in the whole wide world by Malcolm Mitchell and Michael Robertson. And Malcolm Mitchell actually does a free audiobook of this book on YouTube. And I read the book and looked at the audiobook on YouTube. That's what that looks like. And what I love the most about this book was that this is a book to help students who don't like to read. I gave it a 5-star because of that. There are lots and lots of students that, man, when it comes down to reading or writing something, they just throw their hands up and they're done with it. And this book did a really good job of getting them to not be done with it. Next book is How to Get a Girlfriend. I don't know why that book was in there. That's what it looks like. It was literally not. It was cute, but it wasn't. Nope. We do not need to teach our little bitty kids on how to get girlfriends and boyfriends in the 5th grade. They are way too young for that, and they need to be worried more about their grades than getting a boyfriend or girlfriend.
You were right.
So yeah, I definitely, even if I had to use it, I wasn't going to use it. Next book I read for me, it's called The Maidens. I gave it a 5-star. I absolutely love the book and the mystery and the thriller around it to find out who did what. And at the end, I was still very shocked at who the person turned out to be, because even in the last 10 pages, it still has you thinking that it is still someone that is not. But that is the cover. Alex Michaelids, or I can't even pronounce his name. I believe it's an Australian actor, I want to say, or an author, but I could be wrong. Did I? Oh, okay. All right. So this is a spoiler alert review. This was a great book. I literally was on my toes the whole way through the book, trying to figure out who was the person. And I'm still not convinced the story is over. I'm also not convinced that there wasn't another partner, because the male description of himself fit her client Henry, the Professor Foss. It also fit the Detective Morris, and it fit the guy Fred. I definitely didn't expect it to be, for the partner to be the husband. And I'm still not convinced that the partner is the husband. I was heavily leaning towards the professor or Fred. At the end, I was like, Fred did it. I also especially loved how this book ties into The Silent Patient, and then how the guy Theo made a cameo. It was super neat how it tied in. It was so smooth with how it tied into there. It didn't change the storyline in any way. Either book, it didn't change the storyline. It was like a really smooth like mention of the other book and Theo and the conversation with the main character. But really, really, really great book, great read. Native Son was my next read by Richard Wright. I gave it a 4-star rating. And I will just leave that there, because this book in and of itself, I could probably do a whole review on. And so I'll just read and say this is a very powerful book. This is a book where it will have you on all in your feels. You go on a roller coaster of feels through this book. It does start off slow. It starts off super slow. Even after the first 100 pages, I almost DNF'd the book. There was a lot in this book that I was like, are they trying to blame other people for what he just did because he's black and they're white? Like, I was not agreeing with the book. I still don't agree with that perspective, that part in the book. But the overall, I get the message and I get what they're saying. But that little portion of the story, I don't agree with. And I don't think that anybody can change my mind. I've had a lot of discussion on this book. But it is a great read and I do recommend. Yeah. So let's move on. Next book. Actually, next 2 books are partners of each other. One is called Dragon Breath by Michael Gordon, and the other one is called Grumpy Dinosaur by Michael Gordon. And I gave them both. Oh no, there you go. I gave them both 5-star reads. They're cute little books. This one is about the dinosaur needing to practice good hygiene with his teeth. So teaching kids how to have good hygiene. And then this one is The Grumpy Dinosaur, and it was pretty much talking about like why do you have to be so grumpy all the time. Another cute little read. I should have also rated that one 5-star. I don't know why I didn't. Second to last book, Will. I could also do an entire review on just this book. It's Will Smith's autobiography, written by Will Smith and Mark Manson, and audiobook by Will Smith as well. So I did a hand in hand with this book, reading it and listening to the audiobook. It was 400 plus pages. I was also teaching summer school, so yes, I indulged in the audiobook as well. But then after getting halfway through the book, I completely just put the ebook that I had borrowed from Overdrive down and just completely listened to the audio. His audiobook, now I've never raved so much about an audiobook before, but this one, get into it, people. Get into it. He sang some of the songs he mentioned. He imitated the voices the same way he did in the movies he portrayed the characters in. He imitated his mom's voice and his grandma's voice. He had music playing in the background of songs. If in case you didn't remember the song as you were reading it, the music was actually playing and he was rapping the lyrics to the song. It was amazingly done. I actually highly recommend the audiobook over reading the physical copy, but I also got a physical copy of the book because of the audiobook, and if I want to go back and read it again, plus what the physical copy has that the audiobook doesn't have is pictures that you can look at to kind of give a visual on some of the people that he's talking about that maybe you had not seen on maybe his Twitter, or I don't even know if he has the Twitter, but whatever social media he has, if he doesn't have those pictures anywhere to be found, they are definitely now in his, you can definitely find them now in his physical book. So really great read, 5-star, highly recommend. And it gives you so much perspective on why he behaved the way he did in some things, and why he, behind his thinking, why he acted the way he does. It gives you a lot there, and he is way more relatable than some people would think, especially with the last incident that happened with Chris Rock, which there is also a clip that's going around on Facebook. At least I saw it on Facebook and once on Twitter, where that was an imitation of a movie. But yeah, so all that little scenario kind of, everybody's like, oh, forget Will Smith, etc., etc. Dude, read his book. I promise you won't say forget Will Smith. You'll probably say, oh, he shouldn't have did that, but you'll still like him. And then the very last book, which I just finished, and by the way, I finished Will on July 2nd, but I read it mostly through June. Grumpy Monster Dragon Breath, June. Native Son, June. Maidens, June, in case I didn't say any of that. And Mac and Cheese by Sarah Weeks and Jan Manning. Jan Manning being the illustrator. I gave this a 4-star rating, and it is Mac and Cheese. I have this as a class set in my classroom for my lower readers, and believe it or not, there are some 5th graders that read on a lower level. And this was just a cute book. It was just given a reassurance that not all friends like the same thing, and it's okay to be different. Not everyone has the same energy to get up and move about. Some people just enjoy relaxing and sitting still. And the two can be friends. The really hyper can be friends with the chill. But what I loved most of all is that they had a conversation about it and came to an understanding with each other about the things they like to do through that conversation. So to me, it's a great mentoring text for smaller kids. That conversation can draw you very close to people if you truly listen to what they have to say. And in the end, he did get up a little bit. The one that doesn't like to move a lot did get up a little bit because he got up to help a friend. So In that, from February to now, I read 21 books. So from February to beginning of this month, July, I've read 21 books. And I have only started one other book, and I'll talk about that book in a different wrap up once I finish it. So tell me what you think of the books below. Sorry that this wrap up is so long. Tell me what you think of the books below. Have you read them? Have you not read them? Do you care? Do you not care? All that jazz. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye.